Ayin Beis, Volume 1, page Memtes 49, Chapter 30, Discourse 8. That way for sure we have the coordinates. The name is Mimona, and we're in the middle of discussion of 3 levels of energy, or within energy. After a long discussion, but went over 10, 11 chapters, explaining the root of energy, the root of eris, basically, eris, which itself is an opinion, because some people say there's no root for energy, because energy is rooted in the Bleakville. As soon as you say there's a root, you're saying that it's some type of level. Not just complete formlessness and shapelessness. It's not complete transcendence. It has some form of shape in it. The way he was explaining it, the way we're discussing it, is think of like the artist has a vision in his mind of what is going to come. So in the mind, it's just very amorphous and very abstract, but it's still a vision of what's going to come. I just saw in a Maimer, he doesn't bring it here, at least in these Maimarim, another example for it. I gave the example of someone envisioning, this from some Rabbi Maimarim, let's say you envision an apple. So in your mind, you have all the features of the apple, but there's nothing that you can call tangible. It's not a physical apple. I saw the example Tzemach Tzedek brings, someone imagining them traveling. Let's say imagining traveling from here to Australia, or from here to Israel, or from here down the block. He says, in the Machshava, there's no real difference if you're traveling 1,000,000 miles or a mile. Even though you can envision the distance, because let's say you travel, you can envision it took me so long and so on, but in the thought process, there's only it's only a vision. Anyway, this is not really a complete example, because that would be more like Atzilus, or more spiritual, even as a Siyah, for example. But the idea is, in the God's mind, the vision of it all, is he was Meshayir, Shir Atzmei B'Keach. He envisioned the potential, and he envisioned he estimated what he's going to need, what he wants to have. And he wanted to have a world like ours, which in Aces of Kabbalah, this is Esses spheres. For all practical purposes, 10 spheres is like the DNA. Everything is a result of the 10 spheres. So 10 spheres is so-called the first vision of structure of existence. So it will create the Tzira Adam. You say Adam Nas Adam B'Tzalmeinu K'Nusenu. What's its element mus? You're talking about 10 spheres. Meichin and Midas. Chacham Abin Das Chesed Gvur the first Netzach Yisrael Malchus. So after this long discussion, now he goes over to Eir HaGvul itself, meaning the Eir itself, and speaks about 3 levels. And we just discussed the first 2 levels in chapter 29, which is number 1, the level of Eir as it's in its source and its root. And in its source and its root, it is it's pshittus, complete pshittus, as he calls it, complete shapelessness, not just relative shapelessness, but pshittus mamash. And he gave the example called Yachid. Yachid, now Yachid is not like Echad. Echad there's details, and from the details you move to the oneness. Yachid is how it's initially in a state of what you call essential unity, and there's no room for anything else. So that's the first level. That he called what we say in Pasuk Elyon in the beginning, Antuchad v'loy b'chushban. That means that he's one, but not in any type of measurable way, or not in any type of numerical fashion. It's Antuchad. And loy b'chushban, because there's Esses spheres. There are 10 spheres there, but they're not in any way that you can calculate or measure them as 10. Then comes level 2, which we're at this end of the chapter, where it's already now is already the revelation of these 10 elements as individual, distinct entities. However, they're not yet in containers. And since they're still they're after the tzimtzum, so the tzimtzum has revealed them as distinct entities. They're not just all. This is echad already. So they're still that. So they still are under the impact, as he's put it there, of the overpowering impact of the energy the way it was before the tzimtzum, being that this is just revealing that which was concealed. So therefore, they still retain a very strong transcendent element, and are relatively shapeless. This is not relative shapelessness, not absolute. shapelessness. And this is the level, if you next time you say Pasach Eliyahu, you could be Mechavan, is Antu Chakim V'le B'Chachmi Yediyah. Here already you have Chakim. In the Esser spheres, Sagnuzas, the hidden spheres, you can't say Chakim, you can say Antu Chad, Yochid. Here it's already Antu Chakim. It's Chachma, V'le Chachmi Yediyah, which means it doesn't have any type of Yediyah. There's no conscious, or you can't call it an attribute of wisdom. So this is already Antu Chad. Antu Chakim. He's already, God is manifesting through Chachma, but it's a Chachma that's still relative to the containers, Pshittas. Pshittas we translate as formless, shapeless, seamless, all the lessons. Okay. So there we go. This is it. So now we move on to chapter Lamed, chapter 30, page 49. See, he's still in the middle of the second. He hasn't yet reached the third level, just for the record. Now here you go. Valbeis Madregas Hanal on page Memtes. On these two above mentioned levels, which means the Eir HaKolol, or I should say, I should add one more thing. He said all this is relative, because in Lifnei Tzimtzum itself, there's also Yachid, Echad, and Kadman. So when we say Yachid, that the first level is complete Pshittas, we're talking about relative to the after the Tzimtzum, which of course you can then ask the question, so it's not Pshittas Mamash, then it's again relative. So what's the difference between this relative and that relative? Well, as we know with relatives, it's not so simple. Some one relative is not like the next. The bottom line is, I read the letter from the Rabbi yesterday here, from Chelik Tazvov, from Tovshin Test. The Rabbi writes, Lifnei Tzimtzum, you have to remember, being before the Tzimtzum, I elaborated, but I'll just say it briefly, is we can't even imagine it, because if we could imagine it, we wouldn't need a Tzimtzum. The whole point of the Tzimtzum is that this is a reality that we cannot enter. You cannot enter Lifnei Tzimtzum. I'm not talking about La'asad Lavi after Mashiach and so on. In a regular structure of existence, we can't enter Lifnei Tzimtzum and remain intact in any possible way. Because you're talking about what dominates there is completely Eirei and Sof Mamal Kol HaMetzias. The Rabbi discusses there, if it's Mamal Kol HaMetzias and it's Poshet, which means complete seamlessness, how is it possible? So he explains it's relative. But I just want to say the relative of Lifnei Tzimtzum to after is not the same relative that I was saying is after the Tzimtzum compared to Atzilus. Because there's no question, as he gave the example from Aveda, that the only thing you sense is God's will and God's desire. It's like in the artist, the only thing that you sense is the vision of the artist. It's not even relevant what the vision is. He's envisioning it in detail, but bottom line, what's made there, what dominates, is the artist's vision, not the vision itself, and not the spheres. So you can use a more elaboration, but just for the record, it's not just another relative thing, because the Tzimtzum does create a radical change. The Tzimtzum basically moves away from God's dominance in what's called the divine consciousness, to a possibility of a potential other consciousness. Meaning, we use ourselves as an example. We are conscious of ourselves, and we're not necessarily conscious of God. I mean, Amunah, you think about it, you can logically assume, but you're not conscious of it in the natural sense of the word. It's not a L'kuz b'pshittis. I mean, Lashon Achsidus is that before the Tzimtzum, a L'kuz b'pshittis, and Elam is b'yischachas. Which means godliness is the obvious, and the novelty is existence. And today, after the Tzimtzum, existence is the natural, and God is the novelty. Which means it makes effort. The story with the Chassid and the non-Chassid, they discuss, speaking about God. So they're debating God exists, God doesn't exist. So finally the Chassid says to the non-Chassid, says to him, I envy you. Because the truth is, I think about myself most of the time, and I'm very impressed. You think about God all the time. So the guy, who had a shtickle ego, felt very impressed. He's taken such a compliment. So, but years later, he realized, or somebody reminded him, that it was actually an insult. Because the reason you think about yourself all day the reason you think about God all day is because you know you exist. You don't have to think about yourself. So you wonder, does God exist? Does God not exist? Where does God fit in? Does not God? The Chassid, by him, God is a given. He doesn't have to think about it. The question then is, do I exist? Do I not exist? Why do I exist? Where am I? What my role is? And this isn't just semantics. It's like the other one. How would God destroy the world? So you ask a Baal Nigla, he'll tell you, look in Chumash, first God brings a flood, then he brings a fire, then he spreads all the ashes out. There's all kinds of ways to... and you ask a Chassid, just has to open a Sheikh V'Amunah, and there's only one thing God has to do. is to do nothing. So the default state, is not that existence exists, you have to figure out how to destroy it. The reality is that it doesn't exist. And you need someone to want it. It would be like someone saying, how do you stop someone from speaking? You just stop speaking. As soon as you stop speaking, it stops flowing. So, I was just adding this point. That's lifnei tzimtzum. After the tzimtzum is where the structure starts emerging. But it doesn't emerge in a second, it emerges in a process. One of the best examples we can give is what God himself gave us. Maybe this is why he did it this way. A child doesn't just turn into an adult. It begins with something that is completely miraculous, almost like yesh ma'ayin. A seed is fertilized as an egg. No one understands the process, but something happens. That's a chiddush. We talked about Gilei Halam Chiddush. Chiddush means, as I explained yesterday, Chiddush means not necessarily that it's a new thing. It means that it's not an extension of what was there before. Obviously, everything comes from God. So someone could say, everything is Gilei Halam. The Elam Hazar is a Gilei Halam. It's Bri, Yitzir, Asiya. Why do we call Bri and Atzilus, Atzilus? Everything is Bri. So in truth, compared to Atzmos, it's true, because nothing reflects him. Even Eir, in a way, is a Bri. As he said, even Eir is shame. But there are things that God created that reflect him. That when you look at it, it tells you right away there's a source. And there are things that God put in there in place that don't tell you there's a source. They tell you logically there is, but you look at it, you don't necessarily see source. You see it. And then you say, oh, someone must have put it there. Eir is impossible to deny that it has a source. There's no such thing as Eir without a source. A Keli, you conclude logically, but the Keli doesn't yell out to you consciously, I have a source. It focuses on its identity.
You just said Eir is together from Bria.
He said that before. I don't see the word Bria, but it's like Kodmoya Heder is the word.
What's with Shmei?
Same thing. Shmei is Eir.
What's it called?
Eir, because it's bittul, it has an element of it that it's like the source. That because it's bittul to the source, so it can reflect even the part of the source that the Eir itself doesn't have on its own.
So is there a difference between before the tzimtzum and after the tzimtzum?
100%.
In terms of kodum?
Only one thing is kadmin, atzmos. Nothing else is kadmin. Shmei is because he wants it. The Chassidus is lashon ki'ilu ke'ein shekadmo heder. That's the lashon ke'ein kadmo heder. You know the expression? What means ke'ein kadmo heder? It's not really relevant to this at all. I know you keep dwelling on it, but I know. I understand you reached everything until that point. I'm glad to hear. Ke'ein kadmo heder is an expression used in Chassidus. Kadmo heder literally means that the heder preceded the existence of something. So we all know the table was not here forever, so kadmo heder. There are things that are called ke'ein kadmo heder, because the number one is first of all there's no time involved, and number two, Eir, think of it like think of a pole that's infinitely tall. It casts an infinite shadow, but you would not say the shadow is kedim, kadmin called kadminim. You'd say ke'ein kadmo heder, because technically the shadow follows the pole, not the pole follows the shadow. You cannot say there's only one God. Eir is a reflection of that God, and Eir, because its bitl is so complete and absolute, it will express even. Let's think of an eved. It will express things of atzmus that Eir never will understand or relate to. An eved that's completely dedicated to the king. Let's say this eved is illiterate. He doesn't know how to learn. Doesn't know anything. But the king tells him, "I want you to repeat the following words and tell it to my subjects." He'll go repeat it. You listen to him, you think, oh, he's brilliant. No, he's not brilliant at all. He's just carrying the message. He's so bottled that he's able to carry even something he himself, so to speak, doesn't have on its own. So Eir in Yoneh is Gilui. Or else, remember, Leize Ikra Lekush Shen Savim Mena Eir. That's the expression. What does that mean? God doesn't need Eir. But if he wants existence like ours, he wanted Eir because Eir is Gili. Gili is for us. So Eir is Megala. Because it's so bottled, that's why it has an element in it that it could even be expressed, the mitzirsim atzmusei, the things of the etzem that Eir itself doesn't have on its own. And by the way, Eir also teaches us, tells you, I'm not atzmus. Know that everything, what I am is still only a revelation. Eir also tells you that. So Eir does never masquerades as it's not like the king that's, like the guy dresses up like a king, and makes believe he's the king. Eir doesn't have that problem. Because it's bottled. It doesn't have any ego. If Kalim, you gave Kalim that power, they maybe do that. They'd say, okay, you know what? I'm going to be God for a while. You understand what I'm saying? So Shmoi is just a level of, actually Shmoi is lower than Eir, but that's the bottom line. Hayahu Shmei B'Levad is all lifnei tzimtzum, not an atzmus. Fine. What's the problem with what I just said? There's no point because it all comes. It's always
before tzimtzum. That's what you can call kolum.
Relatively speaking, he said. Didn't he say the word that? Remember, he said we learned inside that only atzmus could really be called. What was the expression? We said yesterday. The Rebbe said anything that's not atzmus is already murkav of the one who put it there and the thing. So Eir is already murkav. So as soon as you say Eir, you're saying Eir and Moir. You're saying two. How could that be kaddim kad? That's not a kaddim called kadmen. But the bitl of Eir allows it to taste and give us a taste of atzmus. That's of kadmen because of its bitl. Remember, Kalim can never do that because Kalim don't reveal. Kalim give us a taste of etzem, but not in a revealed way. Anyway, let's continue here. Chapter Lamed. Beis Madregas Hanal, and these two above mentioned levels, which is we're talking about what Yachid and Echad, basically, the level of the spheres how they are in their root before the tzimtzum, complete pshittus, yeah, and the one that's revealed after the tzimtzum as distinct entities, but they're still chakim v'lo b'chachmei, they're still blima, they still have no substance. So he's now saying, identifying that these two levels, Nemar Hamelech Hamerim Levade Ma'oz. And the second, Hamisnasi Meis Elam. Say it in davening. So let's translate. Nemar Hamelech Hamerim Levade Ma'oz. The king that is Hamerim Levade is alone, is exalted or elevated, lofty. Hamerim Levade Ma'oz from wherever, from the beginning. Ma'oz usually means like time immemorial, right? And the second is Hamisnasi Meis Elam, which you right away see is less than you may say. Hamisnasi, he's elevated, he's above from the days of the world. Already means relative to existence. So Merumim is also different to Merumim and Misnasa. They're very similar. Merumim, Remamus. I use the word exalted. Misnasa is Isnasus. I'm trying to find the difference in English. What's the difference between Merumim and Misnasa? What?
The olam is higher. The olam is.
I know.
Misnasa, he has to.
Okay. So Merumim is like be'etzem, exalted, and Misnasa. What's the English word for it? And Misnasa is lofty, exalted. Okay. The Pirish Hamelech Hamrumayim who Shemereim Umenusa. She uses Menusa also here. Menusa be'etzem, that he's essentially and fundamentally exalted and above everything. Right. She'ena Shaykh le'elam is klal. No, it has no relationship at all to the world. I describe. It's I think important to describe something as be'etzem. We used it several places before. We said Yachid be'etzem. We use Pshittus be'etzem. And Pshittus mamish. Then there's Pshittus le mamish. It's a word that he constantly uses. It's important to just see. For us, it's hard to imagine because for us, we live in this tangible reality. So anything that's not tangible is already either it's formless or it's not. But there is relative formlessness. And he's given different examples for it, like we spoke about. Shammai and Hillel, when they hear their teacher, so the teacher's mind, the idea is still shapeless. In Shammai's mind it becomes Gvura, and in Hillel's mind it becomes Chesed. So there are many examples, but it forces you to have to think a little more abstractly, because we don't usually think like this. I mean, this is actually a very powerful psychological insight, because when usually you think about, like if someone comes to you with an issue, or you have an issue, you usually apply the regular tools of how you measure physical things to your own psyche and your own spirituality. And you can't do that because the psyche and the spirit doesn't work the same way. Like in the physical world, the two things can only one thing can occupy a space. It's either I'm sitting in this chair or you're sitting in this chair. Everything occupies its space. Everything is defined by its thing. As soon as you're dealing with something that's a little more shapeless, it could be gray. You know, the first times when you're in yeshiva and they tell us, as Venzel Vumeret, it always made us nervous, which means, depends what level you're talking about. Because for children, gray area is very complicated. They don't relate to gray. Should I do it? Should I not do it? You see, even children, they start asking questions. You told me yesterday I shouldn't do it. So why are you telling me today, yeah? You have to explain to them that there are exceptions. Because when we look at the world as we understand it the logical world is very deterministic and defined. The sun rises exactly 5:04, not 5:05 and not 5:03. There's no two ways about it. Then you start learning about that's okay. By the shkia is even better. There's the real shkia, there's the different shkia, and right away throws you. Which one is it? What's going on? The sun, did it set? Did it not set? Did it rise? Did it not rise? And then you start learning that there's whole levels that are a little more gray, and they're not so yet defined. And we determine ben hashmoshes, all the different opinions. Is it day? Is it night? Is it half day, half night? Is it a third? Is it a new entity? I'm just trying to explain that the Chassidus forces you to go to a place that's less tangible and defined. So when you look at something, you say someone is inconsistent. They behave one way, and then a second later another way. In the psyche, that's not a problem. Paradoxes, we're full of paradoxes. We're full of contradictions. In the physical world, a contradiction is disturbing. In reality, real things are full of contradictions and full of different nuances and different tones and so on. So in general, there's two levels. One would call be'etzem something is merumah, let's say in this case, it's similar to what he said before, yochid be'etzem. It means it's not relative to something else. On its own, it's fundamentally in a state that is, let's call it, unshaped. In quantum mechanics, the example for that is quantum reality is that way. It's not like there are things that you could say, I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, but if I dig deep enough, I'll be able to find the details. The things basically, they're unknown, relative unknown. What means relative unknown? I don't know the secrets yet. They're hidden in a closet. I have to do more research. Or I may never find out, like what's going on, for example, under the earth. No one's ever been there. So it's speculation with a little observation. You may never know all the details what's under the ocean. But there's details there. It's just a matter of time, a matter of discovering them. But then there's realities that no matter, even if you get there, and you see it all, you'll still not know it all. Because it's fundamentally a mystery. So there's a big difference between a mystery, let's say that's relative, that just, it's a matter I don't yet know, but someone else may know. And then there are things that are just fundamentally mysterious because their nature is not one that's defined. So when you say, so I'm just saying that as a general rule about what etzem is, and when you say, let's say etzem or ispashtus, or something is be'etzem or something is lei mamish etzem or lei mamish. There's mamish and not mamish. Absolute, in mathematics, there's I think absolute infinity and there's relative infinity. I don't know if those are the exact words. There are those two levels. So here too, so if he's taking now, here's talking obviously a little higher than all this. He's speaking, there's a state of exaltedness where it's merumah be'etzem, as he puts it here. And it's not because he's a king or he's higher than inferior subjects. So you can have someone that thinks there's a king over these subjects. If he's among bigger kings, he's not a king. Yeah, right. Like Neich B'deire. And then there's a person who's be'etzem at tzaddik, no matter what generation, no matter what situation, he's fundamentally, he's always on an exalted level. Like I said, the Alter Rebbe, they say if he was Zman Tanoim, he would have been a Tana. Zman Amaroim would have been a Meira. That's an Atzmi. What we call Atzmi, Chassidus, say a person was an Atzmi. Atzmi means it's not relative. Wherever he is, he's an Atzmi. There are other people, L'fi Erech, where they are, they can be looked at an Atzmi, because compared to those others that are Chitzenim, or it's not called Chitzeni, Hishpashtus mentioned, there are people who are Atzmin. The truth is we have in ourselves, in the beginning of the Ayin Beis, right, the first paragraph, he spoke about within a human being, he doesn't say human being within Etzem, there's two levels as well. There's the way a melech is completely by himself, he doesn't desire anything. And then there's as soon as he desires something, he already comes out of that place, which is really the two levels that he's going to say here. So continue on. V'zeu levade. And that's what means merumah levade. Look at the diuk in Chassidus, it's meridik. You talk about a tefillah. When you read the davening without any pirush hamilas or without any chassidus, it's basically redundancy. God is great, God is exalted, God is this, God is that. I remember when we were davening as kids, that's what you think. At some point you say, how many times does God have to hear that He's great? So then, of course, the council tells us, it's not that God is there, you have to hear it. But then also to yourself, how many times do I have to hear that God is great? Like I have a story, my uncle, Vashalom Fitzi Lipsker, was in the middle of a thunderstorm one night, and there was a noise, it scared him, so he got up crying, and he ran to his mother's bed. And his mother said, what are you afraid of? He says, the thunder. She said, you should only be afraid of God. Okay, goes back to sleep. Of course, the thunderstorm wasn't over. It started thundering a half hour later again. He comes running again to his mother. He says, I told you. He says, what are you afraid of? He says, I'm afraid of God. So this person was called thunder, now it's called God. So the bottom line is,
had all these things in their mind.
They were intelligent people. I hardly could imagine that they were just being poets and just repeating something 100,000 times. There's no question. I mean, it would be like, did Moshe Rabbeinu and all these people know all Chassidus, all the Pirushim in even in Gemara? It's called Masha Talmud Vasagel. They knew the Klolim. They for sure, I have no doubt, when they say, we say it davening. What do we say? Hagodl Hagibur Haneder. That's clearly the spheres. And it says, Ukvedi Barosi Yitzativ Afasisiv. These are psukim. The spheres are not creation from later. They are hidden in someone reads it. If someone read a pasuk, L'kvei dibaros v'tzat v'afasisiv, no way they did not know that there's a level. I mean, they knew deeper things. And then Kabbalah was l'meish Messina, so they definitely knew. The question is, they knew the details exactly. It's a question about everything this way, But let's put it this way: it's not Alter Rebbe or Chassidus Chabad came and suddenly stuck it into the words. Levado means something. I'm saying when you see Chassidus, the beauty of the Pirush of Chassidus here is not that Chassidus is Machadash. You can see it's a liktakadat. Once you read it, you can say, why does it say Levado here? And Misnasi Meis Elam doesn't say Levado. I think the problem is we don't really know Hebrew so well. By us Hebrews, okay, Misnasi Meis Elam, another way of saying that he's a high, but Meis Elam is not the Levado. So whether you touch up Chassidus, like with its Esesfiris Hagnuzis and Esesfiris Hagluyas after the Tzimtzum, I don't know if they would touch like that. But to touch that there's two levels. Remember, after all, this is language. Esesfiris Hagnuzis is language. If Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting here, I'm sure he would not have a problem understanding any of this. Whether he'd use the word Esesfiris Hagnuzis, probably yeah, because that was Mekubal from the beginning. But it's not the word; it's the idea that there's a level within Elokus. So I have no doubt that and language is a key thing here. Okay, so that's levade. Bechinas hu levade. Who? Bechinas hu levade hu. That he alone is there alone. When you say hu levade hu, it's like even more emphasis that there's nothing else but him. Ukamay v'nizguv havaya levade. Another place it says levade. So here right away you have, when you say the word levade is an emphasis of absolute. As soon as you add levade, you mean that it's not relative to something else. It's essentially loftier. You say, for example, Ein Eid Milvade. So Chassidus actually teaches two ways. Ein Eid Milvade, the Rebbe brings. There's nothing but him. Levade in the same sense, like total, utter. But sometimes Ein Eid Milvade says, Milvade, there's nothing. But with him, there is something. But even there, Milvade is referring to a higher state. Like it says, Ata hu havaya again levadecha, that you are havaya levadecha, all alone. If you take out levadecha, levade, from all these words, what are you missing? Let's say you said hamelech hamarumam, or let's say nizguv havaya, or Ata hu havaya. Levadecha is coming to add the emphasis that it's absolute, be'etzem. That's fundamentally exalted. And what's this level? Now he's saying, V'hainu b'chinas malchus the Ein Sof. This is malchus, because melech hamerumim. This is malchus the Ein Sof. This is the lowest level of the 10 hidden spheres, as he explained earlier. What means lowest? It means it's the last. How it's before the tzimtzum. Shezeh b'chinas ha'shara sheber Ein Sof ha'bligvul. L'hoyeh b'chinas gvul. This is a critical line. He said this several times. This is how the Ein Sof ha'bligvul, the infinite possibilities within the artist's mind, the infinite energy before the tzimtzum is mishayir, envisions something that is defined. So think of an artist who can paint, who can create, or architect create infinite types of combinations and structures, and in that infinite state, he envisions one. So it's still part of the infinite. It's one of those many, and envisions it.
That's Yachid.
That's Yachid, that's Hamelech Murum Levade. This is the Vehain, Ha'eses Sfiras HaGnuzah. So without making any, not to let any mistakes here, it's Malchus the Ein Seif, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Asharas Abein Gvul, Lahoyer B'Chinas Gvul, and is the 10 hidden spheres. I mean, he said this many times before, but it's like giving coordinates. By repeating it, it makes it very clear that what we're talking about here. And this is the first of the 3 levels of energy, within energy. Commission is Barliel Perek of Zayin, as discussed earlier, chapter 27. The B'chinus Madrega Zui B'tachlis HaYichud V'Yiskalas B'Ein Sof. This level. Someone asked me the difference between B'china and Madrega. Not so easy to define either. Usually they're interchangeable. B'china sometimes means, Even HaBechina means like a thing that measure. It's like a way of a litmus test, like a measuring thing. But Chassidus, when it says B'china here, it means Madrega is a level for sure. B'china, how would you distinguish B'china and Madrega when they're used together? And the B'china Madrega Zu, no, when it's not used together, like many times, it's a Shem Ha-Nefel, Shem Ha, you can use either way.
You could say you have 2 different ideas. You want to be mafkin, what's the difference between this idea and that idea? Well, Madrega is more of a
general level.
levels.
Okay. The B'china Madrega Zui B'tachlis HaYichud V'Yiskalas is utter unity and interconnectivity, or encompassment. Be'ein Sof, in the infinite divine light. V'loi b'chushbon, like he said before. Antu chad, v'loi b'chushbon, es esfiras adayin, kanal perek chavtes. It's not yet in any numerical structure of es esfiras, kanal perek chavtes, like we discussed in the previous chapter. V'alkein harizeh b'chinas reimus v'yisnasus legamri. And that's why it's in that type of exalted state. Complete exaltedness. It's interesting, you could twist it 2 ways. You could say, is it because it's Reimus Visnasis Be'etzem, that's why it's all united, or is it because all united, that's why it's so exalted? So here he's saying, because it's all connected to that higher level of the Ein Sof Ablikvul, that's why it's above everything. But it's about Talia, obviously. And that means in a essential and fundamental exaltedness, superiority, heightened state. Since it's not yet can be called a mokir, a source yet. That's why it's an exalted state. So he's adding now another thing. In other words, if it was a source, if you sense it's a source, then it's already relative to what's coming afterwards. Sometimes the Chassidus explains the difference between ilas ha'ilas v'sibis ha'sibis. Ilah is closer to the oval, cause and effect, than sibit ha'mesubav. So sib is more like from a distance. Here he's not using that either, because he's not saying it's a ilah or sib, he's just not even saying it's a makir. The interesting thing is that at the same time he did say that the spheres that come after the tzimtzum are gilia helam from here, not yesh ma'ayin. So either you can say this Nasas Atzmi is not necessarily relative to the air, maybe it's relative to everything, oilness. That's possible. I'm not sure. Or you could say it's also exalted compared to the energy. Not sure about that. Okay. Vagam Shazal Hashar. Oh, well, yeah, there you go. He bavarns this. Vagam, and even though Shazal Hashar L'Hayer B'Midav Gvul, and even though this is a measuring, an estimation, an envisioning of something that will radiate with measure and with parameters, with definitions, so then it is some form of a makir. He just said it's not a source. Nevertheless, because it's still in the vision of the divine, it's not in any form of transmission. Nothing has been transmitted. He's adding now a point that we didn't say till now. Till now, he keeps saying that it was all in the vision. It didn't take on shape yet. He's saying that no transmission at all. Okay, so you can't call it begeder makir. You can't call it in the category of a source. The source has to be that there's something beginning to transmit.
The Ashar is already a makir.
He says no. Ashar is not. He says exactly opposite. He says it's not. Since it's not being transmitted, It's not a makir. Let's put it this way. The artist that envisions one structure amongst many, infinite, he could choose to stop right there and you'll never know. Nothing happened. There's no commitment, so to speak. I mean, Atzmus, of course, is different. Of course, it's going to happen. And whatever. But the bottom line is there's an element there that is not yet, there's no tzimtzum. The tzimtzum doesn't come. It's ki'ilu eina. You'll never know that there was all this stuff going on. In other words, if you go there right now, it's tamidi, right? From there you will not know what's happening. All you'll sense is godliness. This is what we were talking yesterday about, the godliness. The only thing you sense, the Eved Pashat, all he senses is what God wants. It makes no difference whether it's mitzvah daraisa, the rabbanon, or hechsher mitzvah. That's the Rebbe's letter. All he senses is what God wants. Doesn't any distinction. God says a distinction is a distinction, but that's not because of him. That's because God wants it that way. So if you go to that level, that's what you sense. So there's an element of no makir there. Yeah, in essence, yeah, if you talk language, you could say, of course it's a source. There's nothing that after the tzimtzum didn't come from before the tzimtzum. But the question is whether he's calling begeder makir. Not whether, I mean, English, of course, the kav comes from lifnei tzimtzum. So it comes from, the fact something comes from it doesn't mean it's always a makir. The way that state of being is not yet a source, basically. That's what he's adding here. Fine. A makir has to be, basically he's defining makir as being a state of being. You have to have some state, some descriptive state for it to be a makir. Obviously, as I said, everything comes from Asmos, but the question is whether there's an erech. And especially because this general hashara, this general envisioning, he's adding something new now. And specifically because this envisioning is only the envisioning of the energies, not the envisioning of the containers. So therefore it's not possible to say that it is exalted from the thing that it creates, that it brings into being. Rather that it's fundamentally, essentially separate. That's what I said before. Remember I was saying is that I'm snasa l'gabe the eir also. So he's adding now is that number one, there's no makir because it's not yet any transmission. Number two, even the hashara itself is not hashara of the containers. It's only the vision, meaning the energy of existence, of the structure, not the definition of the structure. I explained this yesterday, but let me just elaborate since you're here. Because what's the difference? You could say, what do you mean? If he's envisioning a structure like ours, of esespheres have to have eris and kalim for it to manifest. So as soon as he's envisioning the hashara, is a sheira she'er and sheira she'kelim. Remember, we learned earlier that the pardes holds the 10 hidden spheres is the root of the containers. According to the Ayin Beis, he's going that the spheres are the root of the eris. But the question is it also a root of the containers? According to the pardes, there's no root for energy. Energy is rooted in infinite, in bligvul. Meaning that the energy doesn't have any shape and form. It's like the colorless liquid in the tinted glasses. But according to us, according to the way he's learning here, why can't you say that the artist is envisioning? What's he envisioning? He's envisioning the art. The final art needs containers and energies. But clearly from here and from earlier is also apparent, there's two aspects to this, you could say. When an artist thinks, or an author, or a musician, you can use this with anyone, when they're envisioning a piece of music or a piece of art, what are they thinking about? They're not thinking what color I'm going to use. They're thinking what is the final message and spirit of what this art is going to convey. I'm talking about the initial vision. You don't start with the details, you start with the vision. The vision is I want to convey the beauty of a wedding, let's say. I'm going to convey it in a piece of art. I want to build a home that's going to show luxury and warmth. And then you figure out what are the things that are necessary to make that happen. So a good artist, maybe a quick step afterwards, he knows I'm going to need blue, red, and green to capture that. If I want to convey a war, I'm going to need stark red colors and black and white. I'm just giving an example. But there's two aspects to every entity. Again, we can't look from the bottom up because we are limited vision. We see a table and then we try to figure out what it's about. But if you go from the top down, from the perspective of a creator, and anyone who's written something, anytime you want to convey something, there's the message and there's the instruments, or you could say the kelim, the containers, how you convey the message. The message is the energy. What Atzmus envisions in Nisava Dira B'Tachtenim, there you can say it's everything. Eris and Kelim, that's why you have Eid HaGvul and you have Eid HaBlikvul. I'm sorry, Keich HaGvul for the Kelim, Eid HaGvul, or Eid HaBlikvul and Eid HaGvul for the Eris. But that's an Atzmus. Lifnei HaTzimtzum, you're already talking, and Eid Himself Lifnei HaTzimtzum, what does he envision? What does Eir sense? Eir always focuses on what the source wants, not the instruments, not the colors and the shapes, not how to do it, but what it is. What's the message you want to convey? So if you ask Eir HaChesed, it tells you, my role is to bring God's love to the world. Klei HaChesed will tell you how you do it. It needs to be measured this way. Love has to be, you can't keep on giving, it has to have Gvura Shebechesed. You know, it basically measures the parameters of how to do it, not the what. So Eir is basically the agent of God. So it's the Eir HaChesed. So what does Eir sense Lifnei HaTzimtzum? It senses the vision of what God wants in the world, not the actual details of the parameters and so on. Yet, it also has, as he says, as a spheres, because it's not completely divorced, it's not completely amorphous, like the colorless liquid. It has, it also, so-called, in some form, it has spheres. But the focus is not on the details, the focus is on the message, or the energy. You ever read a book? I don't know if you ever stop to think about it. When you read, at some point, you even lose sight of a page and of letters. The message, the idea is you're so absorbed in the idea that you almost don't even realize you're reading letters. Then you stop and say, one second, let me see this. Hey, it's a line, it's a letter. You don't see lines when you're reading, because with the head is damalt, what you're sensing then is the message. It's so dominant. Or when you're listening to music, if music captivates you, you don't stop and think, okay, one second, what musical notes are being played? Because the Eira Elol Kolona, the overall energy that is coming out of the sum total of the more than the sum of the parts is what dominates. You look at a face. I look at your face. What do I see? I don't see eyes, nose, and so on. I see a face. Now I say, okay, you want me to describe the face? Yeah, you have certain color eyes. But when you recognize a face, you don't have to go through and say, one second, I have to see the color eyes and the shape of the nose. You recognize the face right away. Your memory tells you, I have the vision of this face has been registered in my hard drive, and that's it. So in other words, there are things, everything is made up of details. There's the energy within it, which is more general, so to speak, less detail-oriented, and then there's the details. I was reading, there's a book called Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain. It like teaches you how to draw.
Some people are like that also. They're more general people, some people more detail-oriented.
And economic, for sure. But the people who really get the picture, I remember many times hearing the Rebbe speak, and you could sense that he was seeing something we couldn't see, and he's giving it's like someone seeing something, looking at it, describing to those that can't see it. You could tell the difference. The Rebbe says somewhere beautiful the difference between Teferes and Heid. He says Beid is ein Schenkheit. Teferes is called Schenkheit. Heid is called Schenkheit. He says Teferes is you see the Schenkheit. Heid is someone telling you about it. So you also sense the Schenkheit, but Sniz is al-Buzach. It's not exactly the same thing. The point I'm making here is that's what he's saying here, and I think it's critical to understand that the Hashada in this. Remember, he kept on distinguishing between this is not the Shimu of the Keich HaGvul of the Kelim. There's another place Lifnei HaTzimtzum where there's Hashada, so to speak, for the containers. That's the Keich HaGvul. But there, it's completely concealed. There, God is saying, I want to have an instrument. I want to have a color red. I want to have a color blue. I'm not talking now even about how they're going to be combined to fulfill. That's Tachtenim. I want Tachtenim. Tachtenim, by definition, have no tzura. They're just, what the only thing you can define Tachtenim is that there's no revelation. Like he says in Tanya, Perek Lamed Vav, that Tachtenim means the lowest, not physically lowest, but in Gili Elikus. There's no Gili. That's the definition. No Gili. That means no tzura. Eir by definition is tzura. So if you gave, let's say, an artist, go back to the artist. The artist he has this vision for the picture. Now he comes and says, but how do I make this vision? I need instruments. I need a paintbrush. I need colors. I need a palette. I need a canvas. So vision is not going to... Where does that come from? So that comes from a whole different kav. That's called the kav of keich hagvul of the kelim. But that, the kelim don't reveal their source. If you look at an instrument, a paintbrush, you have no idea what kind of painting you should be making. It's the air and the vision. You look in Teira air.
Who the artist is? You see it in a painting.
Right. Yeah. You only know there's you know that there's someone put it here. It's the vision, and the vision as it's conveyed, so to speak, in the Teira. Teira, God says, "Here's the painting I want you to make. Here, I'm giving you instruments. Your instruments are your arms, your legs, your eyes, your ears, your whole being. I created you in the divine image. Now I'm telling you that you should look in the Teira, allow your neshama to activate, and then paint the painting. Here are the instruments." So in our world, there's clearly two different entities. In Atzmos, keich hagvul and keich habli gvul, or the root of the kelim, root of Eris, are all one, because there's no difference to him. To him, it's one big picture. He needs a vision. He needs the vision of what the art will look like, and he needs the instruments. But as far as Hashara that he's talking about here, that the Eir habli gvul is being meshayed, is envisioning one particular scenario, you're talking about Eir here, not kelim. He did not say this till now quite so specifically. So this is like an addition to what is said before. It's actually very, yeah. Okay, so that's the befrat. So then he says the sheiresh hakelim is rooted higher than the sheiresh ha'eris. That's for sure.
So the ashori is a secondary thing?
Well, he didn't. I didn't see here or anywhere that there's two hasharas. I just said it. You have to say that there's a place where the keich hagvul, that is the sheiresh hakelim, so to speak, is also a form of hashara. But I don't know that the word shir atzmei b'keach I think is only used by Eir. I'm just saying that, but it doesn't change the picture, because there's no question that kelim are coming also from someone wants them. They didn't come from nowhere. No, so the emes is doesn't the kelim have the kelim. Huh? No, it has to go through the hashara for sure. But the hashara was what the hashara is speaking here is for sure hashara se'ed. He says clearly hashara se'ed is le hashara sakelim, meaning that there is hashara sakelim, but this is not what we're talking about here. Bottom line, he's saying two things. Why could you call it Hamelach Hamarim Levade? See, that's also the kavanah when you daven next time. When you say Hamelach Hamarim Levade, think about this. You'll have to think about it. Okay, that's why you could see why Chassidim took time to daven. When you start thinking this, it takes time. Even you could spend a whole year, a whole lifetime just on this. So what do we have here? Hamelach Hamarim Levade. Levade emphasized that it's fundamentally exalted. So he said like this. Why? Because everything there is united. It's in Agdus. Can't even say it a mocker. It's hashada. So the first thing he said, hashada is not yet a hamshacha. It's not yet a transmission. And now he's saying, and even that which it is meshayed is only in the energy of it, not the container of it. You see, the mashal with the artist is lacking one thing. I just should say, in case for the record, it's lacking one thing. With the artist, the paintbrush is not the tachlis. It's just a means. It's a means to convey his message on art. In Dirab Tachtenim, the kavanah is Tachtenim. He wants the bitter of Tachtenim. It's like the bitter of the paintbrush, so to speak. He wants the physical container.
The brush.
I don't know if that's a brush.
No, I'm just giving an example. I'm just using the example I was using. Okay, the canvas, fine.
Transform the canvas into a beautiful picture.
Okay, fine. So that, yeah, that's correct. But it's not really his goal. In artist, the goal is, the canvas is also a means. It's a place for, it's like Legala Shleimus Kechesov. That's not the Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu. Legala Shleimus, that's why I'm just qualifying it. Remember, no mashal is going to be exact. You need different mashalim. That's why Chassidus brings 2 mashalim, 3 mashalim. Each mashal, one aspect. The mashal here is great for understanding the distinction between the energy of the art, so to speak, and the containers of it. But in the kavanah, the purpose is actually the canvas. Not just to express the art on the canvas, but the canvas should, it's a transformation. If an artist has in mind that I want to transform a physical canvas into a piece of art, correct, but which artist thinks like that? I've never met an artist. Artists are much more selfish than that. That's the sheiresh hakelim, higher than sheiresh ha'eris, by the way, is it lacks the ego of the artist. Instead, see, an artist feels a cherem. I want to express my art. Right, exactly. I'll give you an example. My father, God bless his soul, was a very artistic, creative guy. Didn't understand in business and numbers at all. Not that I do, but a little more than him. He was murum levado, and I was like that. So I used to talk to him about the allgemeine business, this. So I was reading a book called The Small Business Bible. Who reads these books? Only people who don't know how to do business read these books. People who know don't have to read these books. So I'm reading the book, and I come to something that struck me very similar. It says there that businessmen don't like to invest with artists and creative people. Because there's two different mindsets. Because creative people, that's what it says, their interest is to express themselves. And a business person's interest is to sell the art to as many people as possible. For an artist, the job is finished as soon as he finishes the painting. For a businessman, the job begins when he finishes the painting. So an artist has already released all his ego into the art. And one person says it's beautiful, in a way he's satisfied. Obviously you want more, but the intensity has already been released. The businessman wants distribution and marketing to bring it to as many people as possible, so they don't speak the same language. Because from the artist's point of view, the businessman, all you want is business, money. So when I was reading that, I came to understand Sheirish HaKelim is higher than Sheirish HaEris. You always think the artist is the selfless one, and the businessman is the selfish one, the money guy. It's the opposite. The artist is just busy interested in his or her art to express itself. The businessman is interested that most people in the world should benefit from it. There should be kelim. The Eid wants to be heard. The kelim is to receive as many. So which is higher? Who's more selfless? So I go and share this with my father. I said, creativity is very powerful, but you need to have someone who distributes to a lot of numbers. So my father, classic, you know what he said to me? And I wanted to get a message, of course. He says to me, that's great material for an article. You should write a book about this. So Das Gufa, he translated into Eir. I was telling him a chiddush of Kelim. He said to me, Das Gufa is a piece of art. You should make a painting about it. Isn't that good? Yeah. That's the classics. I saw there's no hope when it comes to this. Yeah. No, that's interesting. So Sheirish HaKelim is definitely, there's no question about it. Look, the strange twist is that Eir is more selfless than Kelim. But in the end of the day, Kelim are really the most selfless, because Eir at the end enjoys its bittul, so to speak. It's reflecting something. Eir would not be able to survive without Gili, and a Keli does. So Keli, at the end of the day, the Eved Poshet, so to speak, has no Giluyim, has more Atzmi, but he doesn't know it. That's the thing. So, like in a way, Sheirish HaGuf is higher than Sheirish HaNeshama. But Chaz v'Shalom to say that the Guf can do it without the Neshama. The Neshama has to teach the Guf that the Yesh HaNivra is one with the Yesh HaMiti. So Yeshus has a twist. When you transform it, it's much more fundamental, much more essence. When you don't, it can be the grubster thing and the worst thing. It's like Yaakov and Esav. So Esav deserved the brachas, but the Guf can't have them without it going through the Neshama. So that's when the Neshama has to be mislabish in the Levushei HaMizbarer. Yaakov and Levushei Esav.
But the Sheirish HaKelim are mushush in a higher level than Sheirish HaEris.
For sure, because it's mushush, because that's the kavanah. That's kavanah sa'atzmus. He said that earlier. We said that earlier. Nasa, Nishma, and so on. Okay, so let's continue. And the second detail he said, the ashar is in the energy, not in the containers. Ashar is HaKelim. Had ein shaykh leim b'zeh hisnasus ma'adover ha'misava. So since that's the case, so going back to the mashal, in the vision of the artist or the musician, is the energy of the message, not the details of it, not the containers. So you can't say you can't say that he's exalted above the instrument, so to speak. He's not even interested in that. He's not even thinking about that. Now he's envisioning the message that wants to be conveyed through the 10 spheres, not the actual containers and the instruments. Ki'im mashu merumim levade. Rather, this is the level where he's completely exalted. In other words, containers express what he wants, what God wants, what the source wants. A represents that is God wanting it. So from an A's perspective, all that's relevant here is the source, not the thing itself. That's why A always retains its quality of rotzeh. Al korchach. It doesn't want to be there. It never wants to be in there. It's always looking to go back to the source. Even when it's in the body, it creates restlessness for us, which is a bracha. because it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable in a world of structure. It's comfortable in its source, but it's told that it has to go, and it has in it the message of the spheres. But if you ask what's the primary personality of Eir, is not Kalim or Tzir. It has Tzir in it, as we discussed, because that's what God envisions. Remember, Eir is bottle. Since God, the king, is telling the slave, the servant, I want you now to go do 10 things, the 10 spheres, so it has 10. But its focus is because the source tells me there's 10. So all it cares about is the source, all it thinks about. Its consciousness is source consciousness, not self-consciousness, basically. Self-consciousness comes from the Kalim. That's the bottom line. Eir cannot teach us how to be a self. That's the... Okay, so that's Murumla. Now comes the second level. What's the second level? That's the second level. That's referring to the energy as it's revealed, being prepared to manifest in the containers, not manifesting yet. But before it yet manifested yet. This level, no longer, you can't call this level exalted on its own, meaning essentially fundamentally apart. The level of essential or fundamental yemos, fundamental exaltedness. Or elevation, yeah. Because now it's after the tzimtzum. It's already become revealed, and it's already, you can call it bechinas makif. Now it's a source. Now you already have energies that are not sensing just their source and completely encompassed within their source. So think of it this way. Let me just think of it this way. The artist already has expressed what he's going to make. He's already concealed everything else, all the possibilities. The infinite bli gvul is concealed. Even the Eir HaGvul is concealed. Now there is the definition. I'm going to make a picture. It's going to consist of, let's say, a field, a bird, a stalk, whatever. I'm using the Rebbe Rasha, one of the 3 paintings. So he's envisioning now. It's still focusing on the vision, but now you have details. So you no longer, now it is a makir. Now it's a makir for what's going to come next. It's no longer just in that general state, and it's closer to the containers.
That's after tzimtzum.
Now, actually, you can define what container. Now I need this color to make this. Yeah, it's after the tzimtzum for sure. Yeah. Nevertheless, even though you can't call it hamrim levado, ma'oz, it's still misnasi mimei selim. It's still higher. Yemei selim means the days of the world, but it actually means the structure. Yemei selim is usually the midas. Yemei is like shiva yomim, shiva midas. Liyes, it's still higher than them. Liyes ha'eres Elohim gam ken blima. Like you said before, because these energies are still in a state of blima, without substance. B'bchinas pshitas, they're still formless. So they're therefore exalted. They're still exalted from the level of Yemei Selim. What's Yemei Selim? Shein Yemen de Zah. Okay, there you go. The days of Zah. Zah is Zohir Ampin, which literally means the small face. It's just usually the Shisha Midas. Chesed Gvur Teferes Netzach. When you say Zah Malchus, Zah is 6 Midas. Mashpia the Zachar. That's Chesed Gvur Teferes Netzach Heid Yesod. For Yemen, that's the spheres, that's Tzilus B'chlal. And it also can sometimes refer to all the days, all the 10 spheres. So it's either Zah, meaning the Midas, or it's all 10 spheres. Bottom line is, Misnasi Meis Elam is higher than the actual Elis within the Kalim. So it's not Merum Levade, it's Misnasi Meis Elam. So it has that in-between place. It's still relatively, it's now defined already, so it's already a source, but it's still exalted and beyond the Kalim. If you think of it, he's definitely going to explain this in the context of the interface. This is like the interface level, because it's the level between the Eris as they are in the Kalim and the Eris as they are themselves. So this prepares them to enter. What I said yesterday about the model of the 3 stages, this is a key, because this is where you bring together the potential that's in your essence, so to speak, and the actualization. And most people's weaknesses or inability to actualize themselves is this middle level. That's where the problems are. Because many of us are frustrated because we have the power, we feel it, and our expression is very limited. So the key is, how do you bring from the flow should go through. Like for example, let's say in this artist case, you could have a great vision of art. That still doesn't make you a great artist. You could also have technique. You can have. It's the middle ground where you're able to take out from the source how it's in the vision, and relate to the containers. That's where the real creativity is created. Like you'll see people have excellent technique, but you could sense that they don't have the air is lacking. You have people who have the great air, but they don't have technique. It's something like it says in Chassidus about the chush hanegina and the kishrin. Kishrin is someone who knows how to sing. Pashut is a nice voice. Chush is a sense. So it says we can't verstehen Chassidus. Without a chush hanegina, or the opposite. In Chassidus you have to have a chush hanegina. They say the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't have such a beautiful voice. The Rebbe Rashab did. What does that mean? It means that Kalim were not, but the chush he had. So the question is, how do you develop both of them? That is all three are necessary, but the in between is really this middle ground is the greatest place. Because you see many people, for example, I recently have been playing tennis, so I'm playing, naturally, and then someone shows you technique, and you already developed the wrong technique. It affects you because it's hard to change your habit. So if you did the technique l'chatchila, that's why you teach children skiing or music from young age. They don't yet have bad habits, and they're very flexible. Dexterity, as they call it. So they're shaped. The kelim are shaped l'chatchila like the eris. Whereas if you suddenly have a clash between great powerful kelim, yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So that's misnasi meiselam. And in general, we can say the beis b'chinas these two levels, heim b'chinas atik va'arich. These two levels is the levels of atik and arich. We discussed earlier, chapter 15, the essence for the sagnosis and b'chinas atik the ak. That the 10 hidden spheres are the level of atik of ak. Let me just explain. Remember, we always talk about atik. Right. But you have to remember, Atzil is the pratis, and Atzil is the klolos. The plot thickens. You think you've ever it all figured out. Yeah. You have to remember that in Be'etzim, when you say there are 4 worlds, there's no 4. There's millions of 4s. Every level has the 4. So you look in Asiya, there's Atzil Shabasiya, Briya Shabasiya. Like the Demon Samei Medaber. In the Medaber, we have within us a Demon. We have things like bones. We have Tzemeach, like hair and nails, it says. And we have Chai, the animal spirit. And we have Medaber, we have the Seichel. That makes a person a human being. Ability to speak. So Iskalos is everywhere. When we talk about the structure of 4, we're talking about just to give us some, everywhere that these 4 is Yud Kei Vav Kei or whatever it is. But generally speaking, Chassidus, when it says Atzilus, it usually means we call Atzilus the pratis. In other words, the structure goes like this. There's Lifnei Tzimtzum, all these levels. The Kav, or Lifnei Tzimtzum, the Tzimtzum, the Shimu, Kav, Ak, Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. Nekudim is Teu, and Vrudim is Tikkun Atzilus, Bri Yitzir Asiya. That's the picture. But, so when we usually talk about Atzilus, that Atzilus that I just... Yeah. Akudim is between Ak and Nekudim. That's when we talk in general, but in specific form. We talk general, sometimes we'll say Atzilus the Klolos. I'll explain that. Bria the Klolos is Ak. Yitzir the Klolos usually is Akudim and Nekudim. Sometimes there's different ways. And Asiya the Klolos is Atzilus Bria Yitzir Asiya of Pratis. That's usually the picture. Now, so what's Atzilus the Klolos? Atzilus the Klolos is Ak. Is like Bria the Klolos. So Atzilus the Klolos is really Eid and Sof, is the Esespheres Agnuzas. So for Esespheres Agluyas is the Esespheres of Atzilus the Pratis, Esespheres Agnuzas is the 10 spheres of Atzilus the Klolos. Malchus the Ein Sof is the Malchus of those Esespheres, which becomes Atika of Ak. That's the general picture.
Ak is after Tzimtzum.
Yeah, but the Kav connects. The Bria is also after the Parsa between the Bria. As soon as you say Bria, you're already talking about a new entity. Now the Chassidus talks about the difference between Bria Pratis and Bria Ak, but that's not for now.
He's saying Ak is after.
He didn't say Ak. He said Atik of Ak. Atik. the atik, meaning k'ak. The lashon Eitz Chaim is that the reshus of the kav is kegein golgulta, a mile for ak. That's the lashon of Eitz Chaim. As the mile ma'ak, there's ke'ein golgulta. It's ke'ein. It's only me'ein. It's only in our language. We have no other words, so we use the word atik. There's no level atik there because the whole thing is hashara b'keach. But you're talking about if God is, if you want to know where is atik of Atzilus Pratis in God's vision, it's atik of Atzilus of Ak. So basically, atik. Let's put it this way: Keser Malchus the Ein Sof becomes Keser the Ak. Malchus the Ein Sof becomes atik for Ak. That's essentially the picture. The only thing you have to know is it's a completely different dimension, but it's the same logic. It's the same architecture. Let's put it this way.
So Yitzir the close is the Kudim and Akudim.
There's a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek called Drush Gimim in the Odom. He speaks. There's two different ways to say it. It's usually Akudim and Akudim is Yitzir the close. Sometimes Atik and Arich of Atzilus is Yitzir the close. There's a few different ways to explain it. So the bottom line is
we have
Ak, Odom Kadmin.
And Atzilus the close.
I told you, Erein Sof Lifnei Etzim Malchus Eses Firas Agnuzos. You got to go through a few times and you get it. It's not mathematical. It's just really understanding this. Whatever architecture exists in the lowest levels. Remember, as soon as God said, "I created a human being in the divine image," that image goes all the way from the bottom to the top to the bottom. Everywhere you'll have a structure. Eses Firas is within us. And Tanya says, "Eses Keiches Hanefesh Nishtalshlo Mehen," from Eses Firas. Eses Firas Nishtalshlo from Eses Firas Agnuzos. Except as you go upward, obviously it gets more and more abstract. And Atzmus B'chlal, you can't define it as Eses Firas. You define it only as the power, ability, Yechelus. By the way, Yechelus is the closest thing that the Alter Rebbe said. It's even more than Shmei and Keach, Yechelus. But even Yechelus is still considered to be one level lower than Atzmus, because the Yechelus Atzmus. Just, Anyway, so let's continue here. So this is atik and atik, like we learned before. And the energy that comes after the tzimtzum, that's in general arich. So it says in places that ak adam kadmin is arich the klolos hishtalshlus. Sometimes it says arich is. So if you think of it this way, then ak would not necessarily be bria; it would be arich of all the elements. It's just another way of putting it. It's all relative. Atik and Arich. And then would come so-called Atzilus, the Klolos, Bria the Klolos would be below Arich. Which means sometimes it's Chutzenius Ak. There's different ways to explain it. Sometimes it's lower than Ak. Even though the second level, Arich, is a makir, is a source for the 10 spheres. Remember, Atik is Atik Yemen. Hamisnasim, you may say. That's what Atik Yemen is. Netak from Yemen. That's the Arich is already the beginning. Sheirish HaNetzalim is the expression, the root of the emanations. So even though Arich, the second level of energies, is a makar, a source, but still exalted and above, and what do we say? Above them? Okay. It's more than above. It's hard to translate Merum Menusa. I think why in English you don't have people who are Merum Menusa, that's why. You need to have who's Merum, who you know that's Merum? President Obama? Queen Elizabeth? Despite the Jubilee, who's Merum? Bibi? So it's hard to really describe. I guess we can't really figure out Merum unless you meet someone like that. You need a person who's be'etzem, Uvgeheben mensch. Der mensch. How do you translate der hebene mensch? Refined. Avram, you're the master of words. You talk about der hebene mensch. Let's say even in Hebrew. Yishmerum, ich verstehe. So how do you say chutzpah in Yiddish? That's called chutzpah when someone asks you that. The kol zeh ba'eris. And all this is in the energy level, shehem b'bchinas pshitis, that they are in a level of pshitis, shapelessness. The gam madrega habeis hanal is also the Because also the second level that we're talking about, hu b'chinas pshitis, hu b'chinas bli ma, is also shapeless and without substance. Dima yesem madreges protius, even though they're distinct levels, harehim b'chinas bli ma mipnei shatzimtzum b'chinas miut levad. Nevertheless, they're still without substance because the tzimtzum, remember, in them was only diminishing. So what dominates is still the Gilei HaHelam, the Gilei is Me'ein HaHelam. The Eres. So there's still transcendence, basically. They're fundamentally transcendent. I use the word transcendence because, you see, shapeless and form is good from the point of view of, like, is it defined or not defined? But really, what does it mean when something is shapeless? It's because it's not focusing on itself, it's focusing on going beyond itself. That's called transcendence. Something focusing on its defined needs is called whatever the word is. Yesh. Ukanal, as we discussed earlier. Like the hidden chachma, which by the way is an arich, which is higher than the chachma. What does this mean? One second. Okay. It's like Chakim v'lei b'chachma yidiyah, probably. Like the hidden chachma that's higher than chachma compared to the chachma gluya. The lashon is a little how it chachma stima. Shelamayla ma'chachma. In other words, it's like Chakim v'lei. It's like higher. You can't call chachma stima really chachma because it's without substance. Compared to chachma gluya, it's all relative here. That's exactly shvu, but the pashas chachma stima is usually arich. Yeah, and chachma gluya is the third level. Is the spirit is already in the kelim. Yeah. But pashas. U'kamei svara sarav she svara achas adayin, like the svara sarav, the idea, the concept of the teacher, which is still one individual, one indivisible idea. He's talking now about Shammai and Hillel, the pashas, right? Where the svara is still one svara, has not yet shaped into chesed and gvura, even though he made it clear that chesed and gvura, the isur and heter, that Shammai and Hillel will derive from Shmai Vav Tayin, is rooted in there. But it's not shaped there yet. That's why it can sometimes come out like this, sometimes like that. As we discussed earlier, chapter 13.
How did you find that in an artist's work?
It's a good question. Now, artists, it's a little hard to find. I'll tell you, Lifnei tzimtzum, I have no problem explaining it. Because Lifnei tzimtzum, you could say the infinite possibilities, he's now defined one possibility. But still, it's so amorphous and so still not defined yet, that technically you could say it still has, we said it, there's an impression from the Bligvul. It still can go many different, even the 10 spheres itself, exactly how it's going to happen, it could be many ways. After the tzimtzum, you have to say that's still there. After the tzimtzum, now it's defined distinct. But remember, it's still not a piece of art. He hasn't yet put an image on the canvas. So I would say that probably there's still ways. I mean, look at an artist. Sometimes they make, let's say, a tree, and then he could reshape the tree.
He's sketching it out.
Can you then use the actual paintbrush in a thought?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you can. But for example, let's say he wants to change the color. But what I'm trying to say is that you could. Yeah, definitely. The example artist is very good, actually. Now that I think about it, Shmai Vav Tayin are artists. They're teaching an idea. It's a very distinct idea, but the idea has many possibilities of how it's going to be expressed. One can be a chesedic interpretation, one is a gvuridic interpretation, and they're both included in the original idea, and you could trace the steps. So in that sense, it could go both ways. Bottom line is, once it's in the keli, it's either isur or heter. For it to go both ways, you have to be at the second level. That's actually another beautiful application. That means that we're not stuck. Just because you did it a certain way with kelim, you could still go back to the source and redirect it in a different way. If a person, let's say, has a bad habit or is not implementing something correctly. Look, you have this all the time. You have people, let's say, athletes, who for some reason, either due to an illness or injury or just their head, they change their position. And a coach will help them reposition themselves because they technically have the talent, but they're standing the wrong way or they're moving the wrong way. So you're helping them move the right way to get the talent back aligned with the kayach properly. So there is a stage, in other words, where you can still shape it this way or that way. That's what he's saying here for sure. Now comes the third level. Madrega Gimel, and the third level within the energies, which he hasn't discussed yet. These are the energies as they manifest in the containers. They come in a level of tfisa, they're literally grasped, contained. The word contained, I think tfisa is a real good word. It's contained, meaning contained, not just that it contains it. It's like, I don't want to say, we were looking for the word capture, trap, they're not good words. It's not what you mean. You mean contained, that it really fits and works internally, integrated, as I said, within the
parameters. Okay.
Absorbed is for sure. I use the word absorb, but absorbed, yeah, it's a correct word technically as well.
They contain and work within the parameters of the canon.
The best example is what he said in the beginning of the Hemshech, the first three chapters, chapters 2 through 3, 2, 3, and 4. When you take a hand, look, I'll give you a very good example, for a personal example. When you take your hand and you write something, you're in the zone, your hand is not like an outside force that's writing. Your seichel is flowing through your hand and you're actually writing. If you're really in the zone, it's going to be very seamless. There's no way, even though you can train your people to can write with their feet, with their toes, I hardly doubt they're going to write in a book with their toes. They can show a trick here and there. Because there's no seamless flow. The hand becomes a seamless flow. I remember when the first time I used the typewriter, and I type a sikha, it was murder. Because the keys are already a step beyond your fingers. So I would write it first, and then I would type it. Until I kept typing, until at some point you train yourself and the keys also become like your fingers. Never the same, by the way. If I want to write something really focused, I'll usually write it before I'll type it. Even though today I type extremely well and all that, but it's fort a step away. And it's very interesting. For example, word processor. I remember when I went over from a typewriter to a word processor. So it was also another difficulty. It was still a typewriter, but you're not used to manipulating paragraphs and just moving a paragraph. You're used to rewriting it, which is a little more connection to your seichel. But then once you learn how, it's like anything. It's like one of the beautiful things, for example, about Steve Jobs, they say, I saw my granddaughter, you take an iPad, it's so intuitive, it becomes like an extension of your own senses. You're almost like, and that's what they work on. The most brilliant part of technology is they're working on human psychology. What will a human being do? One of the big challenges with mobile is that it's too small. Usually, for fingers to work, you need a certain canvas. You need a certain space. The smallness. So that itself is a whole art. How do you make it that it still works? But the fact of the matter, you'll never be able to, I don't believe, ever have a small handheld that can be the equivalent of your hands really working. Because you need that type of, you could have a small keyboard, but it just never, for a real writer, I can't see writing a book I could see writing a note to yourself. You could write a paragraph, an idea. But really you simply need, there's a certain natural kalim that you need to express. My point that I'm trying to say is that Eris and kalim work like keches and like the keches and evorim, keches and nefesh. It's seamless, and there are many examples. I use the hand because it's something we do intentionally. When you talk about the eye or the ear, that goes without saying. You don't even need effort. As long as your eye is healthy, the eir hariyah will go through it, and you'll see. For example, glasses, interestingly, one who wears glasses, you don't even know you're wearing glasses, because they made a seamless container that just just enables you, it basically counterbalances whatever short-sightedness or nearsightedness we have. My point I'm trying to say is that Islapshus says became tfisa, and Islapshus is that. It's a type of, whatever words you use, I'm trying to, it's more than words, it's explanation. It's where two things meet, literally like a hand and a glove. Even more than a hand and a glove, because a hand and a glove you still can separate. Here it's like more like Esis Achkika almost. The keiches, the human body is actually, a healthy body, is a seamless flow of the keiches that flow through it, without any effort.
Integration or interplay, seamless integration or seamless interplay.
Integration, internalization, is that, yeah. Okay, that's the third level. Islapshus mamish b'kelim, literally within the containers. Ad shenasim kafi muhus kelim, and he goes even till the point that the energies become tailored, they become similar to the personality of the containers. Shebein areich klal legabe eir. Though the containers are infinitely distant from the air. Remember we said it's as distant as the neshama from a guf. And yet they come together. That's of course the kakei hamafilas. That's the biggest miracle of all. Everything we spoke about, that air remains outside of kelim, that's natural. That they should come together, like a soul and a body. Which is another example. When the soul enters the body, you don't feel, I have a force of life and I have my body. You feel, I'm alive. You don't feel. As a matter of fact, if someone tells you, what does it feel like to be alive? And you answer, you need a doctor usually. Life shouldn't feel like anything. There's no sensation to life. If you feel something, it means that something's not right. Like, if you feel your heart beating, you feel yourself breathing, it's usually a sign of quick breath, or you're compensating. These are examples, by the way, that are all used in the first chapter. So if you want to really understand this, go back to chapter 2 and 3 and 4. Primarily 2 and 3. So for example, he's using he's talking about an example of islapshus. Obviously this gives you a distinction of the other two levels. The other two levels are not functional. For example, an embryo, a child, a fetus, inside of a womb, has kalim, the arms and legs are developing and everything, but you cannot yet say that the keiches and nefesh are bislapshus in the fullest sense of the word in the child, especially earlier stages. Remember, he gave the example before about. By the way, Bayless was the year afterwards. 1911 he was arrested. Until 1913 is when that was the mishpat. So 1912, which is here. He was after his arrest. Yeah. It's interesting if that's what it meant. I looked around in history. I got to figure this one out. It could be that. And the Rebbe Rashab was involved in it, in the ideas of how to. They brought a rov there that was the direction, Mazeh to show that the sheshtokin yesod and the ganze mice. Yeah. No, we're talking yesterday. There's a parenthesis that Rebbe Rashab writes in the previous chapter, Chof Tes, close to 2/3 down. He uses mitten as being kamei hayetzel erek rachman al. Someone is brought how would you try hayetzel erek? Someone is
being executed in the way.
And
taking him out to execution.
And death row, right? But he's coming out, so we're wondering who is he referring to? Mitten apprentices. That's not only to give a dogma that the keiches are not begoli by him. So clearly he means something going on here. Leider in 1912, B'chlal, all those years the pogroms were all over the place. I mean, the big pogrom in Kishinev was 1906, right? 1905, 05? I know Samach Vov was right after the Samach Vov was a year of what they call a lot of the, what do they call pogroms in Hebrew? Praot, right. Yeah. What? Yeah. That was one of the big first Lubavitch. Was she in Lubavitch?
What do you mean, Lubavitch?
She lost her hearing because of a shot that was. Yeah. Okay. It's all relevant because the big first immigration of Jews to America came that time. So, okay. Is like the comprehension of Eir HaSeichel. See, he's using the word Eir HaSeichel, not Klei HaSeichel. The energy of intelligence to appreciate, to understand, to comprehend a material comprehension. That's not, it's infinitely distant from seichel, from intelligence and comprehension in the nefesh that is able to comprehend things. So let's say you want to understand, for example, a business idea, or you want to understand how something operates in this physical world. So though good, understanding is more sublime than it is touching something, but nevertheless, it's asog gashmis, that's not be'erech to seichel on its own. Seichel on its own is an abstract force in the nefesh. Like the svara that I did, the way it's in the comprehension of Shammai and Hillel, which he just alluded to. Svara achas. Shein b'chinas chesed gvura mamish. In them, it's chesed and gvura mamish. Shammai sees gvura and he's machmir because he's strict. Hillel that sees chesed, lenient, mekilim. U'kamay keina eirish kashein b'chaykelim hariyem b'chinas muhusu mitzias dover. The same thing is the energies, the way they manifest in the containers. They have now become a muhusu mitzias dover. They have become their personality, and their being has now become a quantifiable, definable. The energy of chachma, ve'er chesed, the energy of love, chesed, ve'er gvura, energy of gvura. He's talking about within kelim, kishehem ba kelim.
Talking about the clear.
Kishehem ba kelim. Yeah. Remember, the eir has it before, but it's amorphous. In Shmai Vavtayin, the chesed and gvura is there too. They're just not defined until it comes into their containers. It's not just that it looks that way. Like, in other words, the energy is without, it's colorless, and it looks that way because the containers have colors. Rather, they actually become literally chesed and gvura, the eir itself, in a form of mitzias, meaning of substance. Ad the b'gdei liyas b'chinas habitl v'yiskalos behem liyas achlifu d'chtayo. One second. Ad the b'gdei liyas b'chinas habitl v'yiskalos behem.
That they're actually mitzias.
How would you read ad the b'gdei liyas?
That means that they actually become a mitzias. That you could actually say that this mitzias becomes interchangeable with another mitzias.
You have to go back to.
No.
Right. Dafka. Right. I didn't read the rest of the sentence. Right. Ad. To the extent that b'gdei liyas b'chinas habitl v'yiskalos behem liyas achlifu d'chtayo, zeh dafka ad gire el elyon. There you go. They've become so defined. He's proving it. This is the proof he used earlier. Once it comes in Shammai and Hillel, Shammai is machmir. For him to now be makel those exceptions, he has to go back to the teacher, go back to the original idea. You need an elyon. You need to go back to the original idea. You can't just suddenly, if the energy had no color, so you could say, you know what? Today Shammai hears gvura. Tomorrow he doesn't have to do anything. He changes his mind because the energy is still remain colorless. Not completely, but the fact is, it's not the case. It's become defined. His thinking is now a gvuradika thinking. For him to get a chesidic thinking, he has to go back to the teacher's svara, or back to Shmai Vavtayin, hear it again, and say, now I hear a different. Because that shows that the energy has taken on the shape. So in order for there to be, he's basically repeating what he spoke earlier in chapter 13. That in order for there to be a bitl of yiskalos, even though it is fundamentally transcendent, but now it's the opposite. Before he was saying the dominance is transcendence and the shape and form is so-called overshadowed, pale in comparison. Here, now once it's shaped in the containers, even though it's still air, in order to reveal the bitl, their selflessness, his scholars and their encompassment in the source, in order for them to exchange role reversals, that's dafka, that's specifically through a higher revelation. But the
end result is that you always go back to the.
You don't have to. It means if you want that, you have to go back.
In other words,
he's not talking here. The bottom line is you need all three. Yeah, he's going to speak about that. Right now, he's just defining the three. Like he says.
Even though the oil itself is in a higher level, right?
What?
I said even though the oil itself is legamri higher than the way it's in the kelim, but still it has like a ball.
Well, let's put it this way: it's a body and a soul. Without a soul, without seichel, the brain is dead. So keli is a dead brain. It's the air that gives it seichel, but the air itself has now taken the shape of chesed and gevura. Like I said, when the seichel is coming through your fingers, it's actually taking seichel in these words. It's not just Any seichel will go. He spoke before about a same seichel goes through different words, will go different seichel. The channels become the way that the seichel is now defined by it. That's a pshat. So then he goes on. Well, that much goes hamshul apachadimei. Esha shalom b'mneva michol sa shal mayim, and Gavriel sa shal eish. It continues there. Okay. How do you translate hamshul apachadimei? That the dominance and pachad and awe is with him, with Eibishter. How do you translate hamshul? Like mamshola?
Yeah.
Like ruler. So hamshul apachadimei. So his authority. So it goes hamshul v'pachadimei, that he's authority and
the fear and authority go together.
Yeah. Okay. That's how it says. Hamshul pachadimei. That the hamshul pachadimei. He's authority and the pachad goes together. Okay. Eisha shalom b'mnei, if he makes peace above between Mechal, the Sar, the Har, the minister of water, and the second half is Gavriel, the minister of fire. And they don't extinguish one another. This is specifically through a higher gili. If the air doesn't have any shape, why do you need a Eisha Shalom b'Mereimov? The air itself is both Chesed and Gvura, or neither. But because the air has become now shaped by Chesed, and the air here by Shamayim, and this one, it's the Hamshul Pachad Imei that creates the Eisha Shalom b'Mereimov, because he's higher. So it has to come from, okay. So this comes from a higher energy. And because angels, we're talking about Michal and Gabriel, even though they come from the world of Bria, Shorshin huma eres v'kelim datzilis. He's answering a question because suddenly he went to a lower level. Achlifa dechtayu is not tzilis. Malachim are in Bria, but he's answering because their root is in the eres, the energies and containers of Atzilus. Like he says in Siddur, this is the Mittler Rebbe, Siddur, Alter Rebbe, Siddur, the Mittler Rebbe wrote, Shara Krishma, the Nefesh, the Malachim, Shorshin, Me'eres Datzilus. That the soul, the spirit of angels, is rooted in the energies of Atzilus. And the scholars of these angels, Sashal Mayim, Sashal Eish, their interconnectivity comes from a higher force that's higher than both of them. This higher energy nullifies their existence, so therefore they can join. Same thing is Batzilas Be'eres HaMislapshim B'Kelim, the third level. Same thing is not Tzilas, the energies that manifest in the container, Shem B'Chinas Chesed Gvura. That they become part, they are now the levels of Chesed and Gvura, like Eish and Mayim and Eish. In order for them to have their nullification and their Iskalis and their being encompassed in the source, why they Eir Elyon Dafka. Not encompassed, Iskalis, that they should be able to interconnect and reverse Chlifu Duchtayu is through a higher energy. Earlier he said, by the way, Chlifu Duchtayu and Iskalis are not the same thing. Chlifu Duchtayu's Chesed becomes like Gvura. Iskalis is where Chesed includes Gvura within it and Gvura within Chesed. But relevant to our discussion is the same point, that since it has shape and form, it needs a higher force to make them interact. And the same thing is for them to unite and to connect in the higher divine energies through a higher energy. He's going now back to the third level, how it's included in the first level. So he's saying like this, because the root of the energies that were encompassed in the infinite light, he's basically repeating that, are united fundamentally with the infinite light. And even when they're revealed. Level 2, when they're revealed, before they manifest in the container, where they're in a level of without substance and without personality. They're also united in infinite light. And the way they manifest in containers, level number 3, even though that also then there's still energy that is connected to the source, because they're fundamentally air, they're still air. And this is also connected to what we learned earlier in chapter 14. that the 10 spheres relative to the 10 kelim, even the third level, is relative pshittas. So in other words, now we have two relative pshittas. You have the relative pshittas of the air is the second level, air before the containers. There's the air in the containers are also relatively formless compared to the containers, which remember, containers are mamash chesed and gvura. They can't even change. The air, when it's in the container, is chesed, but it could go back to its source and assume gvura. The keli can't do that. In other words, personality of Shammai will never become chesed. His way of thinking can at times be chesedic. Okay? Makol mokim. This is the third level. Nevertheless, even though it still retains its formlessness, it still retains an element of transcendence. Nevertheless, for it to experience transcendence, it's through a higher energy. In other words, even though the energy compared to the container is formless, but once it's in the container, it itself cannot just do it on its own. It has to go back to its source, like back to Shmai Vav time, back to the teacher, to regain its so-called abstract, ethereal nature. In other words, this is important because it's the interface. Just like the energy has to have in it esospheres in order to manifest in the container, you also need it to retain its transcendent element, and you also need it not to get so comfortable in the keli. You want it to always feel restless and know that I'm still an air. That's going to be relevant later. Remember the 4 different dysfunctionalities. So it's just important to know that the air still retains that, and it goes back in order to get that real higher state. Like someone can say, you know what, I'm happy with my life here on earth. I'm a little transcendent, and now so that's it. No. Real transcendence, you still go back to your source. You don't just have it easily. Onto the kosher. This is the continuation of the Pasuk Eliyahu. Like we say, Antu, you are the kosher that binds. Umiyachadlon. That? Yeah. The kosher loin. What is loin referring to? The Eretz HaMislabshim B'Kelim. Antu the kosher, you are the one that binds them. Umiyachadlon, and unite them. The koyal Eretz HaMislabshim B'Kelim. So you have in Pasuk Eliyahu all 3 things. Antu Chad is the first level. That's what Sagnuses. Antu Chakim Chacham Yediyah is level 2.
Where doesn't go to the keli?
Right? And Antu the Koshelon, you're the one that binds and unites them. The Koyal Eretz HaMislabshim B'Kelim refers to the energies as they manifest in the containers. The Iskashus V'Sagdu Shalem, their connection and their unity, in the infinite divine light, and also their unity and their interconnectivity.
What does that mean?
It comes from Ant, from a higher energy that binds them together. What does it mean? We just said Chesed and Gvura, that they work with each other. And nevertheless, it's higher than the Kelim. Their dvekus, their connection and their unity is in the form of who he and his energies are one. In other words, distinguishing it from that he and his containers are one. Because at the end of the day, even though they need the ant that connects them, remember the air, even in the Keli, is still air. It's both ways. Why? Because this third level has now become a mitzias, something of substance according to the personality of the containers. That's why, specifically through a higher energy, that's how they have the bittul. They don't have it on their own. They cannot have it on their own. They have a certain element of bittul, but the real bittul that they have, in order for them to be able to unite and interconnect, comes from something greater than themselves. Really meaning from the air, the levels of air that are before the third level. Kitzur, the summary. The first level, is the level that is fundamentally exalted. That's the level of Atik of Adam Kadm. The second level, which is Eidus after the tzimtzum energies, but they are now distinct entities, but they're not yet in containers, so that's Bechinas Arich. That's the second level. The Kol Zeh Bechinas Blima. And all this is without substance. He doesn't say whether it's Arich the Ak. It looks like it's Ak itself. It's Arich. It's Arich itself. Arich the Klolos. Yeah, it looks like it. Well, sometimes Ak is called Arich of Shtalshlus, Arich Kloli.
Unless if you're calling Ak Bria, then it's Arich Ak.
Okay, that would be then Pnimius Ak. Then it's Pnimius Ak. Remember, it's the cause of Bima. Remember, Arich is the Shadish on its own. There's the root of, it's already a mokir for the spheres. Gimel, the third level, these are the energies that manifest in containers. Shenasim Ke'erech Muhusa Kelim, they become like Ke'erech, proportionate to the personality of the containers. And this, that they reverse their roles, and also their connection with the source. And the third thing, that their interconnectivity, all these three things, that they can exchange roles, that they're connected, and that they see clearly Iskalus and Achlif and Duchtaya are two different things. Iskalus, and that they are interconnected.
Iskalus means that there's chesed shel
Right, exactly. Yeah. Duchtaya is chesed b'klei gvur. Yeah. So Iskalus comes from a higher energy that radiates on them, ubahem, and within them. Okay, we'll stop here. So we did chapter 30, page 49 and 50.